Recognize the member for Oak Bay, Gordon Head.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise and speak in support of Bill 4, British Columbia Innovation Council Amendment Act. As speakers before me have articulated, this act has two major changes. One, of course, is changing the name of the British Columbia Innovation Council to Innovate BC Act. And this is important, and I'll come to that in a second. And the second major change, which I think is very important to emphasize, is that the mandate of will be Innovate BC, the new organization, will be expanded, and in particular, the details as outlined in the previous act, the specific objectives of the council per se. In the previous act, that's section 3 of the act that's being modified, is going to have an addition now which says that the mandate will also, the Innovate BC will also offer tools, resources, and expert guidance to entrepreneurs and companies in British Columbia, including in respect of building capacity to access new markets and attract investment. Now, this is important because embedded within, or while not specifically stated there, what this is recognizing is a recent appointment of Alan Winter as British Columbia's Innovation Commissioner. And what the Innovation Commissioner, of course, is going to be that advocate for the BC, the BC's the name escapes me just for a second, Honourable Speaker, the BC's new Innovate BC agency. So why it's important to change the name is a couple of reasons. When a new organization comes in, it's often the time to switch the directors of a new organization to give it a sense of new purpose and new vision and new direction. And we're quite inspired by Mr. Winter and all that he has done for British Columbia, both in his capacity as a CEO of Genome BC, as a small business, a large business, just a wealth of experience in innovation across a diversity of areas. You know, the creation of an Innovation Commission and the position of Innovation Commissioner is something that was embedded in our confidence and supply agreement with the BC NDP, and we're grateful to be able to work with them to move this forward. In fact, the so-called CASA agreement states that one of our goals collectively is to establish an Innovation Commission to support innovation and business development in the technology sector, and appoint an Innovation Commissioner with a mandate to be an advocate ambassador on behalf of the BC technology sector in Ottawa and abroad. The mandate and funding of the Innovation Commission will be jointly established by representatives of both the BC Green Caucus and the BC New Democratic Government, and the Innovation Commission will be created in the first provincial budget tabled by the New Democratic Government. And that indeed has been met. And what's important here is that when one looks at the establishment of the Innovation Commission, one recognizes that it's actually at an opportune time because the focus here in British Columbia is moving to mirror exactly what is happening in Ottawa, recognizing that we can compete in innovation like no one else. So the emergence of Innovate BC and the Commissioner comes at a time when Ottawa is putting money into these very same programs. And it is critical that we have one single point of contact in terms of melding these programs together, because historically, Honourable Speaker, in British Columbia, innovation has been spread across 6 different and separate ministries, much like fish farms are, as we've discussed in question period. You know, technology is exciting here in British Columbia. In 2015, when we have the best data, there was over 100,000 jobs in more than 9,900 companies in BC, with wages that on average were 75% higher than the BC industrial average, you know, with average weekly earnings of almost $1,600 a week. It had the 5th consecutive year of growth in 2015, and about 5% of British Columbia's workforce was in the tech sector. That's more than mining, oil, and gas, and forestry combined. I'll say that again for those riveted at home, that there was 5% of British Columbia's workforce in the tech sector in 2015. That is more than mining, oil, gas, and forestry combined. Now, it's very odd that somehow in British Columbia we continue to perpetuate the notion that we are but hewers of wood and drawers of water, and that our economy is based on oil and gas, or our economy is based on the extraction of raw materials and shipping of those raw materials elsewhere. In fact, full 7% of our GDP comes from the tech sector. We know that the overwhelming component of our GDP comes from the real estate sector, very high fraction of it, but 7% from the tech sector. So again, I'll come back to that in a second. We know in 2016, more than 106,000 people going in working in the tech sector, and by 2020 it's projected to be by more than 120,000, and I would suggest, Honourable Speaker, that that will be an underestimate. We know that investment in BC Tech will be increased by up to 100 million by 2020, and that recently, and I give both sides of the House credit here, there's been an increase in talent pool and an increase in funding of actual post-secondary institution places to actually promote continued growth of training of highly qualified personnel in this area. That was an initiative started by BC Liberals, continued by BC NDP, and one that we support all the way through. We recognize here, Honourable Speaker, we recognize as a caucus, as a small caucus here, that our economy, that playing a key role in the tech sector is absolutely central to our economy. We will never, ever, ever compete with a jurisdiction like Angola or Namibia or Indonesia in terms of extracting raw resources straight from the ground, because we internalize social and environmental costs into the cost of doing business in BC that may not be internalized in other jurisdictions that don't have the same social programs that we have and demand that we have here in BC, or the same standard of environmental protection that we have and demand that we have in BC. For us to compete, Honourable Speaker, we can compete by racing to the bottom. The journey into LNG tells us what that leads to, goose egg. Or we can compete by being smarter and by building on our strategic advantages. Today, Honourable Speaker, in the legislature, we had a number of interns visiting from Washington State, and we were talking with these interns from Washington State. The idea of building on strategic strengths came up, and what was interesting is that I was reminded of a story when I was at the University of Washington. There was a fellow there. His name was Ed Sarachuk. He was my postdoctoral advisor, and we were working in some climate modeling area. And Ed said to me, he said, "You know, Andrew, we're at the University of Washington. We got an IBM 3090 here. That dates me. It was a vector-based machine. It's pretty old now. That was in the late 1980s. We're never going to compete with NCAR, with Princeton or MIT in terms of the powerful computing that they have access to. But we can be smarter and more efficient and more clever, and we can win through efficiency and being smarter." And he was right, that by focusing strategically on things that we could do well, rather than the brute force race to the bottom approach, we were able to do some neat stuff. And that's exactly the same with the tech sector. We can't compete through digging dirt out of the ground when we're internalizing these costs. But we can be more efficient, we can be cleaner, and we can export in a more efficient and cleaner way the resources that have historically been a key component of British Columbia's economy. Now, one of my favorite companies is a company called MindSense in British Columbia. It turns out, I didn't realize that until with the mining delegation, when a bunch of my former students ended up lobbying me about mining. And then it turned out that one of the key founders of MindSense was another former student from UVic. But this kind of blew me away. I'm sure as a former teacher, Honourable Speaker, you know that you see these former students popping up everywhere, and you wonder how they got from where they are to where they are now. But I'm blown away by that company. It's a company that developed technology to actually assess upfront quality of minerals to determine whether or not it is cost-effective to truck it a long distance to the crusher and process all that grade, or just push it to the side to be used as fill later. That's innovation. That's efficiency. That allows us to actually compete by actually harvesting or mining our quality or high-grade minerals without wasting the time of digging up all the stuff that's not economical. We can export the minerals and compete through efficiency, but we can also export the technology and compete through technology. This is why it's so critical to have Innovate BC and the Innovation Commissioner. Because in BC, we have a disparate bunch of programs out there, many of which don't match with programs that exist federally. In talking to CEOs of a diversity of small startup companies, they're frustrated. They're frustrated by the fact that they'll go through a process to apply for grants federally, and then they'll have to go through the same process in a slightly different way to apply for grants provincially. I was excited in speaking recently with the Innovation Commissioner, Alan Winter, who recognizes that there's some duplication there that's not necessary. By streamlining programs, not only do we let innovators be innovative as opposed to writing the same thing twice, we actually are able more efficiently to tap into federal money, which actually is good for our economy here in British Columbia. Now, Honourable Speaker, I have some experience in this regard. It's something British Columbia has, known as the BC Knowledge Development Fund, an exceptional fund that's used to lever money from Ottawa through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, which provides funding for large pieces of equipment for universities. I don't know what the process is like now, but I do know that when I applied and got a supercomputer a number of years back, again, it was a duplication of a process. The CFI process was rigorous and onerous and took an enormous amount of work to bring together stakeholders from a diversity of groups and organizations. And then we had to just rematch that process with the BC Knowledge Development Fund. It seemed to me that if we follow the Quebec model, that there's some duplication there, and we recognize that one process could satisfy everything. So I'm hoping that the Innovation Commissioner will see as we move forward opportunities here. It's clear to me that, we are so very lucky to have Alan Winter as the Innovation Commissioner. He recognizes, as members opposite have raised, the importance of actually thinking beyond broad roads as just being things to take people from A to B, but in terms of broadband as critical to getting information from A to B. It's clear to me that he recognizes that our rural communities will be empowered upon receiving access to broadband, not only singular broadband, but redundancy, as some bigger communities will get. And this is how we'll compete. When we bring our tech sector, and tech doesn't just mean coding apps for the smartphone. Tech means biomedical sciences. Tech means revised forestry handling tools. Tech means thinking of new engineered wood products. Tech means bringing together the forestry sector together with innovators in technology who see that you can make new things like insulation from wood products or roofing beams from wood products. Tech is about bringing together, tech is about innovation. And innovation goes far beyond what often people think it only is, which is the smartphone app. Our biomedical industry, as I mentioned, is one. In the automotive industry, we should be having innovation in that here in British Columbia. We should be leaders in the adoption of EVs, quantum computing. In British Columbia, we have one of the D-Wave. We have one of the world's leading companies in quantum computing. This is tech. This is the way for the future. We've got fuel cell technology. That's another form of tech. And let's not think that tech is just about smart people with lab coats who have engineering degrees. Tech also requires people to construct and build, and highly trained people in a diversity of trades, whether it be electrical, whether it be mechanical, whether it be the construction using carpentry. You need all skills working together to actually take the idea from the lab bench to fruition. We look at the issue of clean energy, something that I'm desperately hoping this government will pick up. There is so much potential for innovation in British Columbia, whether it be Rocky Mountain Solar, a project that the member from Kootenay East I hope to get excited about shortly. Rocky Mountain Solar, which is a solar company that has private land, and the transmission lines go right through the private land. They've passed the standing offer program. They've actually gone through the standing offer program, but they can't actually get going. They've got partnership with UBC to actually have a research facility there. They could scale up to 45, 50, 75 megatons of capacity. But again, if we're stuck thinking the old way, the 20th century way, companies like Rocky Mountain Solar, who want to invest their capital, they want to construct and build, which requires carpenters and tradespeople, to build capacity, which is for a solar field there. British Columbia's first and only grid-scale solar facility. It needs innovation, and it needs a champion and a commission that actually can do that within government by bringing together the various diverse groups there. You know, I'm excited, Honourable Speaker, by the Minister of Jobs, Trade and Technology, and in particular, it's a mouthful for a poor, humble soul like me. Minister Jobs, Trades and Technology. I thought I'd wake a few up there over there. Not allowed to speak if you're not in your seat there, member from So I'm excited because, you know, in meeting with the civil service who were working in this area, you can see the passion and you can see the desire to make this work. You know, I'm thrilled with the caliber of the civil service who are getting behind this Innovate BC initiative. I'm thrilled about what's coming up in terms of the tech summit that's going to be happening in the coming months. We have a very exciting time. But, Honourable Speaker, we've got to get a handle on a couple of things. The Innovation Commission, or Innovate BC, Innovation Commissioner, they can't do everything. Government's required to set a culture. Governments are required to set an environment that allows them to innovate. And what does that mean? That means we've got to get a grip on the affordability crisis facing British Columbians, because you can be the best innovative person in the world and have the most wonderful idea in the world, but if you can't get anyone to work with you because they can't afford to live here, it ain't going to take off. It's going to move to New Brunswick or somewhere else. And we also have to ensure that we have a competitive environment in terms of the tax and the education framework. I have some sympathy with members from the opposition, some sympathy with members of the opposition who are raising concerns about the employer's health tax. It's not clear to me that the details have been expanded upon fully yet, but this needs to be explored a little more, you know, for a number of reasons. You know, we have a very odd taxation system in British Columbia, where we have this magical barrier of $500,000, above which you start paying now an employer's health tax, and you also start paying corporate tax. Now, the problem with that, Honourable Speaker, is there's a natural ceiling which stops innovation and growth. Why would I, if I'm a company making $450,000 a year, want to move up to be a company that's now making $550,000 a year? I crossed that $500,000 threshold. It's an artificial threshold, but now I'm paying corporate tax and I'm paying the employer's health tax. We need to take a hard look at how we have our taxation system. Step functions are not as conducive to growth as perhaps small linear changes. And again, that will be the role of the government to explore that in more fully. Honourable Speaker, you know, it is a short bill. It may seem like a minor change, but the implications are profound, because the implications are sending a signal to the market in British Columbia that we're here for the 21st century. Innovation is going to be the engine and power of our economy, and that we want to send a signal to British Columbia that there is an agency, there is a champion to actually ensure that innovation is able to emerge at the lab bench and move through to production down the road. Let's ensure that that happens in British Columbia. Let's ensure that the stories that we hear time and time again of company building it to $1 million a year and then selling out to a Silicon Valley company, let's create an environment here in British Columbia, not only in Vancouver, but across BC. The member from Kamloops, South Thompson, I think, yeah, South Thompson, talks about the tech sector in Kamloops. He's right. Really exciting things going on in Kamloops. We've got the tech sector in Kelowna. They're happening there as well. Some concerns about Kelowna in light of some changes to the distance and digital tax credits that were dismissed and retroactively applied. Nevertheless, there's some excitement happening there. But it doesn't have to stop in Kelowna and Kamloops. Prince George, if we've good broadband redundancy in there, should be a capital of tech innovation, particularly with the forest and mining sectors. We go to Terrace, we go to Prince Rupert, all across British Columbia. If we're able to bring broadband and broadband redundancy in, we're able to give the innovators in that community a way to actually access high-speed information. And I tell you, it's a lot easier to buy a house in Fort Nelson than it is to buy a house in Richmond. And the beauty and quality of what we offer here in British Columbia is second to none, whether it be in the north, whether it be in the east or the south as well. So, Honourable Speaker, I'm thrilled to see this emerge, Bill 4. It's a small change, but a mighty change, and I stand in strong support and thank you for your attention on this bill.